I want to read a quote.
Mm.
It's only going to be my introduction for today. It's a quote that someone sent me several years ago, and it has been printed out on my desk since then. And as I was preparing for today, I swear to you, I didn't just make this up. I saw the quote, and it could not be more relevant to what's going on. And the quote is this: "I love America more than any other country in this world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." I happened to listen to a podcast last night hosted by Noor Tagore. Noor is a Libyan-American journalist and activist, phenomenal young woman. She happened to be the first Muslim who to pose for Playboy. She posed for Playboy fully clothed and in her hijab. And last night's episode was titled "Being Critical of Something You Love." That's kind of where we are right now, being critical of something we love. And I don't care where you are in this country, where you are in this world right now, if you don't know that the world is on fire and that it needs repair, you basically are living under a rock. I met Devita several years ago, but before I met her, every conversation I had with anyone who was anyone in food always wound up to this: you have to meet Devita Davison. You just have to meet her. And they would say, you have to meet her. She's this wonderful, progressive thought leader, spokesperson in the areas of food justice, food policy, food access, food systems, and food inequality. And of course, I now realize that that means that she is also a progressive thought leader in the areas of justice, policy, access, and inequality. You cannot separate food from the larger system, can we, Devita?
Oh, not at all.
So let me just very quickly, I'm sure all of you have totally stalked Devita because she is extremely stalkable in terms of her mad amount of intellectual power, and what she obviously has a huge voice in Detroit, and does very impactful, very effective work through the not-for-profit FoodLab, of which she is executive director. But beyond that, she did a TED Talk that has really changed so many people's views on food access, food sovereignty, urban gardening. That TED Talk has had more than 1 million hits. And something that really spoke to me was, beyond the TED Talk, there was an article that Food and Wine posted last night. And I happened to send the text, that article's link, to everyone I knew in the food business, including my young son, who is a millennial and a chef living in Los Angeles, involved right in the middle of this very, a large city that is extraordinarily broken and racially divided. And he immediately read the article and texted back that it was possibly the most important article on food he has ever read. So I'm not saying that my son is an expert. I'm saying that you have struck a chord with this article and with your work. So Devita, can you, I also want to mention one other thing. Your ideas, when people say you're progressive and radical, sorry, hold on. I'm kind of like, why are your ideas so radical? Should it be radical in 2020 to be thinking that food access, for all, inequality, food, whatever we're talking about today, that is it almost ridiculous to you that these ideas are considered radical at all?
So thank you, Martha, so much for that amazing introduction. I can't tell you what it has meant for me to be your friend ever since we met at the FAB conference years ago down in Charleston, South Carolina. You and I have stayed connected. You visit me in Detroit. I have visited you in Indianapolis. We have been together in New York. So I just wanted to set the precedence in an environment right now where there is so much performative activism that is happening, that when there is so much the unity that is being perpetuated for show. Mm-hmm. I just want to set the context that you and I are real friends and we talk. So this conversation between myself as an African-American woman in Detroit and you as a white woman in Indianapolis, this is not performative. This is two friends having a conversation that is really an opportunity and a privilege for your audience, right, to be a part of our conversation. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me on. And so, Martha, because I'm talking to you, I also feel like I can and I will show up as my full self, and that might be imperfect as it is. But what that means is that I'm going to be honest. And so there's a part of me that says, of course not, it should not be radical, right? It shouldn't be radical at all to have access to healthy, fresh food. It shouldn't be radical at all to have access to affordable, quality, dare I even say, free healthcare. It shouldn't be radical to want clean water. It shouldn't be radical to want your children to go to good, decent schools. No, it shouldn't be radical. But I live in the United States of America. I've always been Black. I was Black yesterday. I'm gonna wake up Black tomorrow. I'm Black today. And what I understand is that if you live in a country in which the foundation of this country is capitalism, then you have to understand that in order for capitalism to continue to grow and to spread, and when we put capitalism first, that means we're going to put bodies second. And typically, when bodies are sacrificed, typically when bodies are oppressed, particularly when bodies are overlooked because of capitalism, for the sake of capitalism, those bodies look like mine, Black and brown bodies. And so, no, it for some is not radical at all. What it does tell me, though, is what I have always known. And so I would love to know who was the person, because that quote that you gave in the very beginning, oh, this quote about loving this country so much that we have to critique it. I want to know who said that, because that is so important. Not only do I love this country so much that I want to get up every day and critique it so we can strive to be better, is that I don't only feel that way about this country, but I also feel that way about the industry, Martha, that you and I work in every single day. Is I love the restaurant industry. I love the chefs and the cooks and the purveyors and the restaurateurs and the workers who work in our industry. But I love it so much that I will critique it every single day until we do better by what we now know as essential workers, right? Which is our front line, our front of the house and back of the house restaurant workers. And so, yes, it is radical, but here's what I know. And there is an absolutely amazing project that was done by the New York Times, which is called the 1619 Project, that was commandeered by Hannah Nicole Jones. And one of the things that she said so much is that even though when our forefathers sat around the table to create the Constitution, Black bodies were not taken into consideration when our forefathers wrote in the pursuit of happiness and justice and liberty for all. They were slave owners, right? But Black folks love this country so much that even though we weren't thought about when the Constitution was written, we still believe in that creed that the United States of America is a place that provides liberty and justice and equality for all. And we see ourselves in that Constitution, even though it was not written for us in mind. That's how much we love this country.
I'll tell you,
yeah.
Let me tell you about who gave me the quote. It was, this is going to blow you away. It was Killer Mike. You know,
Okay. Yes.
Mike out of
Yep.
Atlanta. He has not seen the video of the speech that he made in Atlanta on, I believe it was Saturday night.
Okay.
It's worth tracking down. But we were on a panel together. This is even before I met you. Somehow I got to be on a panel with him.
Wow.
I received some very negative, I received some kind, this really isn't about me, but in the context of this quote, he's the one who gave me the quote. He's the one who said the quote, and the quote from James Baldwin.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so here we are. But tell me a little bit, before we dive deep into FoodLab, what you do, your work, the future of FoodLab, can you talk to us about Detroit today? What's going on in Detroit today?
Yeah, I think what's happening in Detroit is it is what is happening in Michigan is happening in every single state in the nation. Martha, I've got to tell you, like our country is divided, so deeply divided. It is. It's so deeply divided. Rural and urban, north, south, east, west, blue state, purple state, red state, like division. But do you know, at least in my lifetime, this is the first time that every single state in the nation has acted in solidarity on one accord. There's not one single state in the United States of America that has not shown up in mass numbers to protest police brutality. My God. Martha, they're protesting in South Dakota. like, do you understand what they're protesting in Hawaii, Alaska? Like, they're protesting all over the country. There's not one state in the union that has not joined together. The people of this country have not joined together to protest. Wow. So Detroit is, yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. That's brilliant. Amazing. People are all over the world, actually. But
it is.
That Americans are out is amazing.
And so, but here's the thing, Martha. I think that folks are starting to realize and understand that this is really a powder keg moment, Martha. And what I mean by that is that wealth inequality in this country is so deep. It is so wide. Income inequality in this country is so deep and so wide. Do you understand that Jeff Bezos made, what are they saying, $200 billion just within the coronavirus by himself? One man? Like, income inequality, wealth inequality, racism, systemic and institutional in this country is running rampant. This is a powder keg moment. And what I mean by that is that folks in Detroit, and particularly Black and brown bodies all over this country, we have been on the front lines, Martha, and have been disproportionately affected for decades, right? We're still in the midst of a pandemic where Black and brown bodies are disproportionately affected by the coronavirus, not only in the number of cases, but also, Martha, in the number of deaths. We also realize that Black and brown bodies are disproportionately affected as it relates to police brutality, right? And the violence that has been afflicted upon our bodies. Detroiters have known this for a long time. Well, so how are we in Detroit right now? Yeah. I'm thankful that because Detroit was aware of these things that have been leading up to this moment, people are hurting, people are scared, people are broke, people are angry, people are mad, as they should be. And Detroiters have known this, Martha, for a long time. So what we have been doing in Detroit for decades is organizing. Well, I'm so proud of Detroiters right now, because due to our organizing efforts that we have been doing for decades, this has then propelled us now to take all of those organizing efforts and move to the streets. What I'm waiting on is that how are we going to move this moment of action into policy change? So we're organized in Detroit, and we've taken to the streets, just like every other place in the country.
So Matthew and I have spent time in Detroit. We've spent time with you. We go to Detroit. We are remarkably inspired by the city and the people who make up the city.
Right.
When people talk about resiliency, I honestly think of the people of Detroit, the city of Detroit. Can you speak a little bit about to talk about where Detroit is going and where Detroit is? You do have to talk a lot about the history of Detroit. And
Yeah.
then you would actually have to go back and talk about slavery and the South and the systems and all that. Can you give us a quick, you do such an incredible job of putting into context Detroit and why Detroit is so special. Can you talk about the history of Detroit, what it was in the 70s, what it became in the 80s and 90s, and what it is now?
Absolutely. Because so much of who I am is bound up in Detroit's history, and is bound up in decisions that were made for me before I was even born. And I'm so thankful for that, Martha. And so I identify as a first generation Detroiter. And what that means is that I was the first generation in my family that was born and raised in Detroit. So my mother and father are both from Alabama, and they made the decision, like many African Americans, over 9 million African Americans made the decision for the very first time to step out on faith. And the faith that they stepped out on was the faith that if they left the rural South, if they fled the oppression, Jim Crow, lynching, the brutality, the inequality that they faced in the South, and they went north for jobs and opportunity, might they have a better chance of making a better way of life for themselves? And for me, it was my mother and father making a decision. Not only can they make a better life for themselves, but also their unborn children. My God.
Was it the auto industry that was the draw for jobs, or what was it about Detroit in particular at that time?
Yes. So to give you and the folks listening a really great reading source of material that I hope you'll share is Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns. And so, yes, absolutely. It was for jobs. It was for better housing conditions. It was to also, be in a city where they might have opportunities for better education. But Martha, why Detroit? The same answer to why Detroit is also the same answer of why Chicago, of why Ohio, why Newark, New Jersey. And so what Black folks did in the South is they simply followed transportation and the railways. So it's not a coincidence at all that the majority of Detroiters, Black Detroiters, who came from or migrated from the South to the North, particularly Detroit, where I was born, was from places like Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. That's not a coincidence. The reason why is that they got on what they call the Central Line or the Central Train, and that train took them up the country centrally, right? It's not surprising that the majority of Black folks who come from Chicago, they come from places like Louisiana and Arkansas, right? Is because they took the train route that was located in their city, in their neighborhood, all the way up to Chicago. And for New York and from New Jersey and even Boston, those folks come from Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. Why? Because they got on a train that took them straight up the East Coast. So the transportation system helped to dictate where Black folks who were a part of the Great Migration, as they left the South, they moved to the North, right? So that was not by chance. It was done very intentionally, and that was them taking advantage of infrastructure that was created through the trains and through rail. And so I guess I'm so incredibly blessed, Martha, because somebody loved me so much as their unborn child to think about my life before I even breathed life into this world. And that is two parents who thought enough about their unborn children to position themselves in a place where they could have the best chance of providing a life for their child and their children, because I have a younger brother, that was better than their life. My God. And so my mother and father left Alabama and came up to Detroit in 1965 and bought their first home on the northwest side of Detroit. And what's really interesting, Martha, about that piece of history right there is my mother and father bought their house in 1967. That is so important. And it's so important. And that's why I said, Martha, earlier, is that I am so anxious to see how this civil unrest that we're seeing right now, these rebellions, this rising up, these riots, how they cause policy change. Because you want to know what happened in 1968? Martin Luther King died. And as a result of his assassination, uprisings took place all over the country. And you know what immediately passed after the uprisings took place in this country? The Civil Rights Act. And you know what was part of the Civil Rights Act? The Fair Housing Act. How do you think my parents got the opportunity to buy their first home, to start accumulating wealth? It was because Black people put their bodies on the line to pass policy. My God, people don't understand what's happening. There's a quote that someone shared with me in Baltimore. And the quote was simply this, is that particularly our Black young people are looking for places where they can find warmth. And if they can't find the warmth by looking and going places, they will burn buildings down until they find it. And what that means is that we do not pay attention to folks who are protesting in silence. We don't pay attention to activism until we start burning down buildings. And all of a sudden, we have the attention. And so it is my life and where I sit today and the privileges, the little privileges that I've had as a Black woman navigating my body through this nation has been because somebody put their life on the line. My ancestors died for me. My parents made a decision for me. And I am so appreciative of my ancestors here in Detroit and also the South, who loved the next generation so much that they died so that we could have a better way of life. So my question is, what am I going to do to ensure that the generation behind me, which is my 4-year-old niece, her name is Aaliyah, so that she can have a better way of life? The baton has been passed, and I have to ask myself every day, what am I doing? So that's just a little brief history of how Detroit has shaped my life.
So before we get to how you're doing, not how you're doing, but what you're going to be doing, Detroit to me is such a fascinating city because it had all this hope and promise for so many people, right? So much hope, so much promise. And at some point, Detroit was this huge, gleaming city.
Yes.
What happened?
Yeah, so.
I mean, it was 2 million people strong.
Yeah, it was. And so, Martha, what happened is America happened. Okay, and so there is, I'm probably going to be dropping jewels of resources and information for folks to read, to follow up, because I spend a lot of time reading, spend a lot of time writing. It's really important for me to understand and to put things in context. So the folks know that I'm just not kind of like just talking obscurely off the top of my head, is that a lot of what I think about history to ensure that I don't replicate things that were done in history in the past. And so there is a book that I'm reading right now that's called Know Your Price, and it was written by Andre Perry. He works for the Brookings Institute. And one of the things that Andre Perry says is that, Martha, there is nothing wrong with Black people that racism cannot solve. And so what happened to Detroit? Systemic and institutional racism happened to Detroit. And so here my parents are, and 9 million African Americans thinking, oh my goodness, we are about to embark on a journey that is going to change the rest of our life. We have been hearing about this shining city on the hill. We have been hearing about all of these jobs and opportunities in the North. We know that Detroit, Michigan is the Mecca of automobile manufacturing. Hell, the city of Detroit put the world on wheels, and we are going to the promised land, Detroit, Michigan, for better opportunities. Well, Martha, what they were met with and what we don't talk about nearly enough is the segregation and racism that Black people were met with when they arrived in the North. We can talk, Martha, all day about the racism and Jim Crow laws that were perpetuated in the South. But are we going to talk about the racial covenants and the redlining and the segregation that Black folks were met with when they came to North? So I'm going to tell you what happened to Detroit. Detroit was at one time the 4th richest city in the country. Can you imagine that? And in my lifetime, I'm 50 years old, I saw it go from one of the richest cities to one of the poorest. And a direct result of that is policy. A direct result of that is the extraction of resources and money that left the city of Detroit and went to go build out its surrounding suburbs and neighborhoods. Why? Because white folks, of course, not only do they not want to live next to Black people, we saw that in segregation, right? But they don't even want their children to go to school with Black children, right? And so this country has created violent policies. We talk about police brutality being violent and killing Black bodies, but what about violent policies that directly kill our livelihoods by extracting resources from one community and putting them in the other? And that's what happened. And Detroit went from a city with a population of almost 2 million, Martha, to a city right now, our population hovers just under 700,000. Why? Because there was a mass exodus, as we know as white flight, of white folks who left the city and went to the suburbs. And that propelled itself after the '67 rebellion in Detroit, after King, before King was assassinated, and it continues to this day.
So I remember when I first went to Detroit and we spent the afternoon together and you gave me a tour of the city, we talked a lot about even the road structure, how the streets created these artificial divides and made it impossible for, they broke up neighborhoods. They made it impossible for neighbors to get to neighbors, for neighborhoods to be next to neighborhoods that have been together for forever. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And so this is what I'm talking about, Martha, when I talk about violence. And this is when I talk about the oppression that has been afflicted on Black bodies. And I love that you mentioned it. This is why I talk about the importance of policy and how they can shape neighborhoods, communities, and also how they can determine the livelihoods of folks. I think that there's no other indicator in this country that can determine your future unlike your zip code. Your zip code can determine even your life expectancy. And Martha, that again is by no consequence, right? I mean, that's by no coincidence. Right. It's happenstance. And what you're referring to, again, it is not only Detroit. That's why I want people to understand that this is institutional, this is structural, because this did not only happen in Detroit, Martha. What happened is that because of, right, Black folks moving from the South to the North during a period that they called the Great Migration, African Americans in mass numbers, and so were Mexicans and people that were coming from South America. They were moving in mass numbers to the North, looking for opportunities, looking for jobs, looking for a better way of life. And the North responded by segregating communities and neighborhoods. So that what they would do is they would steer Black folks into particular neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods became overwhelmingly overpopulated. Sound familiar? Something like, urban housing and projects like that we know today, still going on, right? And so they would relegate African Americans into certain neighborhoods because white folks did not want them in their neighborhoods, absolutely not. And so what happened as a result of these bodies that kept building up into these communities, they became overpopulated, right? And because there was not investment in these communities in roads or housing or in infrastructure, they also became ran down. And so the government thought, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pass legislation that's called the Urban Renewal Project. And the Urban Renewal Project was supposed to be a project that they were going to be fixing up and investing into these communities. And it required for folks to leave these neighborhoods. And supposedly these folks are going to come back. Martha, that's not what happened at all. The Urban Renewal Project kicked off an infrastructure project. And that infrastructure project was the creation of highways and freeways that drove right through Black businesses. And it allowed folks to go from the downtown area, which was always the center of commerce, to use these freeways and highways to go out to the suburbs where people lived. And so white folks who lived out in the suburbs now could get on the freeway, get on the highway, never have to drive through a Black neighborhood. They can get to work downtown, they can leave downtown, get on the freeway, highway, go back to their communities. And those freeways were built through what? Black neighborhoods. I think the most infamous one that we hear about all the time, and someone who actually stood up for her community, so they did not create a highway through her neighborhood, has to be Jane Jacobs, right? In New York. They tried to run a highway through what we now know as the Lower East Side of New York City, but they were unsuccessful. The person who kind of spearheaded this urban renewal is a man by the name of Robert Moses in New York. But they ran highways through Harlem and the Bronx. They ran it through Detroit. Guess where else they ran a highway through? Minneapolis. Guess where else they ran a highway through? Ferguson. Guess where else? Oakland, Baltimore. I mean, this is systemic, intentionally. Atlanta, right? And so these are places which were intentionally separated, so that you had this divide, and the divide for us was infrastructure, highways, freeways, and walls. There is a wall on 8 Mile in the city of Detroit that was built because the banks said, if you do not have a demarcation, if you don't have some type of structure that separates Black neighborhoods from white neighborhoods, then the white neighborhoods would not be able to qualify for the best rates when it came to their mortgages. So they built a wall along 8 Mile to divide the Black neighborhoods from the white neighborhoods, so the white neighborhoods could get mortgages from the banks and the Black neighborhoods did not. It's history. It's our history.
Well, talking about,
people have to understand this.
Yeah, that's why I really wanted you to talk about, and I realized Detroit is not the unicorn. It's not the only one. It's one of probably every city and every urban planner from the 60s and 70s.
Absolutely.
So I understand what you're saying. And honestly, it's very, it's just awful to hear. So,
and Martha, I bet, and I don't know Indianapolis well enough to know, but I bet you in Indianapolis, there were racial covenant laws, and there was some infrastructure that was built as well. There were resources that were extracted as well from Black neighborhoods. I mean, I don't know Indianapolis to speak on it, but I bet you there's a divide, there's a demarcation in Indianapolis that divides the Black neighborhoods from the white neighborhoods.
100%. So, you were talking about the kind of the accident of birth type stuff, the history that goes into making you and what you are and what you stand for, what all of us are. Talk a little bit about how the Great Migration, people coming to Detroit from the South, and tell me how it impacted food.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martha, for asking that question, because the article that Kat and I had a conversation about, her podcast and the subsequent article that was written, I didn't choose the headline at all. That comes strictly from Kat, the editor over at Food and Wine, but it so encapsulates who I am, and that is
radicalized around food.
Yes. Yeah, and that is so true, right? Yeah. It so much is about my identity, and so how this influenced me and my radicalization around food is because, again, my parents coming from the Deep South, they brought with them their hopes, their dreams, their aspiration, and their passion, but they also brought with them some hard skills. And those hard skills that I will forever be grateful for is their ability to grow food. And they understood long time ago that growing food has always been a sense of pride, right? But more than pride, oh my goodness, it was a sense of power, right? And so when we talk about food sovereignty in the city of Detroit and how we aspire for food sovereignty, it really is about power and control. And the reason why we are so adamant about having the power over our food system is because we know what it's like to be dependent on global corporate entities for food. And so in the city of Detroit, in 2007, every single national and regional grocery store abandoned the city. And so when we talk about this population decline from going from 2 million folks to just under 700,000, not only did residents leave and neighbors left, but commerce left as well. So the grocery stores decided to abandon the city of Detroit and then go and move into locations probably where they could get tax cuts, right? And probably, of course, where they felt that there were a greater number of their potential target market consumers. So they left Detroit and they went to the suburbs. And I have to tell you, my generation, of course, we were perplexed. We were thinking, where are we going to go to get fruits and vegetables? Like, Mom, like the grocery store closed down the street. And yes, Detroit also has a very strong network of independently owned grocery stores, but many of the grocery stores in my community had left. And so being just not knowing, like, where are we going to go in order to get fresh fruits and vegetables? And, you know, the elders just kind of looked at us and was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like, young people, relax. Like, we know how to grow food. And maybe this is an opportunity for you all to join us out in our backyards, at the community gardens, at school gardens, at church gardens, gardens that are in community centers, so that you all can learn how to feed yourselves. And so, yeah.
Of community gardens, neighborhood gardens, the garden system in Detroit, it has got to be one of the most advanced and incredible systems I've ever seen in urban environment.
Yeah. I think here's the thing, Martha, and this has been an initiative that has been a long time in the making. That I have the benefit of. I am not responsible for the building out of this infrastructure, but I will say what Detroit continues to prove every single day and to strive for, that, Martha, we can have all the people power we want to, right? And so we did have the people power. We had folks with the skills and the knowledge who came from the South, who brought with them their agricultural prowess and skills, who knew how to grow food. My goodness, Detroit is located near the freshest body of water on the planet. We sit on 20% of the freshest water on planet Earth, not in the country, on the planet, right? We're surrounded by Lake Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. Like, we have access to water. And what the kind of decrease in our population left us with, as folks began to leave and abandon Detroit and go to the suburbs, it has left us with land. And so, yes, those elders and the people in our community took that vacant land and started to grow food. But Martha, you can have all the people power you want to. And so for folks listening who be like, great, we've got some people who are engaged around urban agriculture and they want to grow food. That's great. But without, Martha, having the money and the resources to invest in the infrastructure and the coordination, it will not mature, develop, and scale so it can have the impact that Detroit has had its impact in urban agriculture. And that would not have happened without having well-funded organizations on the ground doing this work every day. Organizations like Keep Growing Detroit, where, Martha, you had the opportunity to sit out on the farm with us to enjoy an amazing meal on the Keep Growing Detroit farm. But they are a nonprofit organization that supports over 1,600 farms and gardens in the city of Detroit proper. That's not free. That organization has to be funded, and it has to be well funded. Another organization doing amazing work is DBCFSN, Detroit Community Black Food Security Network, where Baba Malik is the executive director. Mama Hanifa organizes their youth program. They sit on 7 acres of land. That work is not free, Martha. They have to be funded. Mama Jerry over at Oakland Avenue Farms. I mean, we have 1,600. So I can go on and on, but all I have to say is that what you saw when you came to Detroit was because Detroiters have been out front fighting for the funding of organizations that have been cultivating the infrastructure so that we could support this amazing urban agricultural epicenter that I call one of the baddest epicenters in the world in Detroit, Michigan. And we have been working with our legislators. Debbie Stabenow, who sits on the Senate Agricultural Committee, she fights for us every single day to bring back money to Detroit so we can expand and grow. Like, this is what, Martha, I keep going back to this. Like, let's not let this moment that we're in right now have us in despair. We've got to radicalize ourselves within this moment so that we can begin to fight. And that fight for me looks like policy change so that it can impact not only myself, but more importantly, the generations after me.
Will you talk about FoodLab, the organization in which you're executive director?
Yes.
And how it feeds into collaboration with some of these other organizations that you've met, how it supports members of the people of color community, minority community, and helps them to incubate businesses, especially good food businesses?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. Martha, hold on. I'm gonna reach down. I gotta grab my charger because I don't want us to get disconnected, and I'm at 5%. Hold on 2 seconds. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. So embarrassed. Oh gosh. Okay, yeah, I'm charged up now. Sorry about that.
I asked you to talk about your organization and how it feeds into some of these other organizations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so what we knew at FoodLab when we got started, and again, just to put it into context, the year that FoodLab got started, it is super important. And so it got started in 2012 out of community. And it really started for aspiring food entrepreneurs, chefs, and people who have food businesses to come together to figure out how they could continue to not only start businesses, but how they can also be better stewards in their community. And that year was 2011. That's crucial. Okay. 2011 is crucial because it is sandwiched in between two things that happened in our country, right? In 2011, FoodLab got started as a media group in a direct response of something that happened 2 years prior, which was in 2008. So in 2008, what happened? We saw the crash of our global financial system with Wall Street crashing. And so what we know in this country is that when Wall Street catches a cold, Black folks catch pneumonia. And so the impact of that global financial crisis impacted Detroit particularly hard because the majority of wealth for Black folks in this country is tied up into their homes and in their businesses. And so as a result of the mortgage foreclosure crisis, many of Detroiters lost their homes. And as a result, they lost wealth. And so we were trying to figure out at that time, what could we do collectively for folks who had a passion, who had a desire, and quite frankly, Martha, were already doing, Abbott, it was informal, right? Cooking food out of their homes or in their backyards or frying turkey in their garages, were already selling food. We were thinking about how we can do this collectively so that folks can move out of the informal economy and into the formal economy so they could actually create brick and mortar businesses and begin to scale. That was 2011 when we got started as a meetup group. Martha, you know what happened in 2014? The city of Detroit filed for the largest municipal bankruptcy in the country. Mitt Romney wrote an op-ed for the New York Times that said, let Detroit go bankrupt. And so we knew two things, Martha. We knew the federal government wasn't going to save us because they were already in the midst of the world global financial mortgage crisis. And we also knew that our own state, our own city government wasn't coming to save us either because our city was more concerned with, as they rightfully should have been, how to keep the streetlights on. how to improve fire and police and ambulance response. They were more concerned about city services. They weren't focused on entrepreneurship, economic development, saving neighborhoods. And so we came together because we thought the only way that we're going to see ourselves out of this crisis, build businesses, try to create wealth, is to not only create businesses, allowing people the opportunity to do what they love on their road for freedom so they can actually start a business. But how can we also couple that with ensuring that the businesses that they were creating were good food business? So we can tackle two things. We could try to look at entrepreneurship and small business ownership as a response to the economic crises that people in Detroit were feeling. But if they also locally source their ingredients from the thousands of farms that were located in Detroit, if they also provided healthy, fresh, culturally appropriate food, might that also alleviate a public health crisis that we were experiencing in the city of Detroit? And that is that the majority of Detroiters are shopping at party stores, corner stores, gas stations, fast food restaurants. And as a result of that, they are experiencing, and we should know this now because of the coronavirus, they are experiencing what we call these chronic related diseases: hypertension, obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes. So could we try to tackle two birds with one stone? And that has been our work since 2011, is what does it look like when we create a local food system that comes out of community for community, and we advance through all kinds of methods of business education, technical assistance, access to markets, the ability to locally source our food from farmers, the ability to take advantage of vacant spaces so that we can start retail businesses. But what if all that was done with people in the community centered in the midst of that? So what does it look like to create an ecosystem where we are leveraging our urban farming community, creating good food businesses in neighborhoods that have been historically and traditionally marginalized for decades? And those businesses, my God, are actually owned by Detroiters.
Let's talk about some of those businesses. FoodLab Detroit has been incredibly impactful in taking someone's idea and getting it to a successful brick and mortar model. I know that the restaurants that I choose when I'm in Detroit are the restaurants that have a FoodLab connection, because I also know that they share the ethos of FoodLab regarding being good food restaurants. What does that mean, good food? What does culturally appropriate food mean? And tell me a little, and we don't have a lot of time left. I want to know about FoodLab during COVID and future.
So good food for us means if you are creating a good food business, that business sits at the intersection of three very important things. And so when we talk about a good food business, Martha, we are talking about a business that was created who are committed to, and I know folks don't get it right all the time, but at least they are committed to not only looking at one bottom line, is that they want to operate their business using an accounting methodology that we call the triple bottom line. So there are three things that they're looking at. Profit, that is important, right? Because in order to be impactful, in order to make business, in order to make changes, in order to be sustainable, you have to have a profitable business. But we question what profit means all the time at FoodLab. But more importantly, you also have to be looking at another bottom line, or two very important bottom lines in addition to profit. And those two things also start with P. The second one is people. And so you're looking at your bottom line as it relates to people, Martha, and this is a conversation that you and I have all the time. And that is, who are you hiring? Where do they live? Are they experiencing any barriers to employment? Maybe because they're young, maybe because they're a returning citizen, maybe because they're a veteran. What's the bottom line look for you? What are you monitoring in your hiring process? Are you paying them a living wage, not minimum, not sub-minimum, but I'm talking about a wage that they can take care of their families on one job, not 3. So is there professional development that's built in to your onboarding package? How are you hiring? How are you developing your staff? Like, what does that look like? So what are those bottom line measurements and metrics? What does your dashboard look like when you're taking people into consideration for your business? And then the third one has to be also the planet. And so we can't even begin to talk about the planet, Martha. You hear people all the time espouse on the fact that, oh my goodness, I got this carrot from this farmer, and look at this heirloom tomato that I got from that farmer. Yes, locally sourcing is important, but you can't begin to talk about sustainability in an ethical restaurant if you don't talk about how you are taking care of your people. So many people care about the fruits and vegetables that's on their plate and not caring about the people who's serving them the vegetables. And so when we talk about planet, yes, we are talking specifically about where you're sourcing your ingredients. What does your recyclable or composting program look like? But being someone who's conscious of the planet should also be someone who's conscientious of the people that's on the planet. So at FoodLab, we identify our FoodLab member businesses, and Martha, I'm sure you've seen them, by a decal or a what we call a window clean that they put on the outside of their restaurants, their windows or their doors. And one of the FoodLab businesses that I speak about highly, because I love them dearly, has to be a FoodLab member business who truly understood what's it like to take food that is culturally appropriate to the African American community, a cuisine that we know and love that's called soul food. It's the food of our ancestors. It's migration food. It's struggle food. It's food with history. But what they did was they took a food that is familiar, that has a cultural connection, and they flipped it on its head, and they created Detroit Vegan Soul. And so now it is a plant-based vegan soul food restaurant. And so those owners are Kirsten and Erica Ussery. I speak highly of April Anderson, who also owns Good Cakes and Bakes, and all of her delicious baked goods, brownies and breads and cakes. They pay homage to those, what I call those layered cakes of the South, German chocolate, pineapple upside down, caramel, pound cake. But April chose, when she opened her doors, that all of her ingredients would be organic. And so that's what I'm talking about. All of the people that both Good Cakes and Bakes or Detroit Vegan Soul, either they hire people from the community, people from the neighborhood, and their staff is reflected of the citizenry of the city of Detroit. And so that's what we talk about at FoodLab when we talk about what does good food businesses look like for us. I think moving forward to your last question, Martha, what will we do post-COVID, is we will do what we have always done. And that is that we will continue to push our thought leaders, our elected, our public officials. We will continue to engage entrepreneurs, even now more than ever. I am excited about, now that we have this use of technology, Martha. You know, you and I were on a call a couple of weeks ago, but there should be no reason why Detroit can't continue to be this trans-local kind of connection place where I'm connecting with folks all over the country, talking about the importance of lifting up and supporting locally owned businesses. And I tell you, Martha, we got work to do. Because what I don't want to happen, and which I'm going to be depending upon you and folks like us, me, you, Katie, people from all over the country, when we get together, even in Charleston, okay, we're going to be talking about, we cannot allow this restaurant industry, Martha, to go back to what they call normal. No, that's not going to happen, okay? We are going to be trying to set the standard, Martha, of what it looks like to actually own and operate a restaurant where we are paying our workers fair wages, where we are providing benefits, where we are taking the time to do personal development with our employees and really shaping this industry where we are not just hiring workers, but we're creating a path line toward professionalism, where people feel proud and are gaining the skills to be the best that they could possibly be in this restaurant industry. So there's no going back, but I'm gonna need your help to do this.
I'm going to need your help because as typical of every conversation I have with you, I walk away realizing that I am learning way more from you than I can contribute to the conversation. I do not feel like this is ever an even exchange because I get so much inspiration from you. And truly, I'm just amazed by your level of thought about all of this, but beyond thinking, you're out there doing it. So,
But Martha, so are you. So are you. I mean, I tell people all the time when they say, "Oh, this can't be done. How are we gonna do this? I don't understand. Like, what are you talking about? You know, how are we gonna pay our workers beyond minimum wage?" And I said, you know what? Go to Patachou. Go look at Martha. I gotta tell you, Martha, I defend you. I mean, I don't defend because you don't need defending, but I lift you up all the time. And I'm like, and I have to say this, and I say the work that Martha has done in her community in Indianapolis, I've seen it with my own eyes. I follow everything that you do. Is that I say, you know, if Martha was a man, a white cisgendered man, all the things that you have done, Martha Hoover, like seriously, you would be Time Magazine's Woman of the Year. And I mean, the work that you have done and your team has done in the Patachou Foundation, Public Greens. I mean, Martha, it's just, oh my goodness. I tell everybody, I want to grow up and be like Martha Hoover one day.
That means a lot. But can I ask you one question that is kind of blushing? You mentioned in the Food and Wine article about restaurant menu pricing. Can you talk about that a little? Because I think that what you're saying is probably the most accurate thing, is that restaurants today have to be profitable. They have to be profitable so that they can do better for their people. We cannot go back to a normal that also, by the way, was oppressive, and particularly oppressive to people who were minorities and female, and you know the whole story. So how can we do it? We can't do it. You talked so eloquently about a Popeye's chicken sandwich for $3.99. I know people are going to run to Food and Wine site to read your interview, but could you, before we close, talk about that? Because I think it just, to me, it was so of the moment, so smart, so wise.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Martha, is that we gotta keep talking about this. We really do. We have got it. And what we have to do, Martha, you and I and people in the industry that we know and love and have joined arms and are lockstep with each other in order to improve this food system, is that we have to keep talking about this, lifting it up, and connecting the dots for consumers. Consumers, they have so much going on that they're not paying attention and they're not connecting the dots. And so, Martha, I think this COVID-19 pandemic really kind of lifted the veil, right? And so when folks see that the COVID-19 has not only disproportionately affected Black folks in urban communities, but we know that they've also disproportionately affected certain workers. And the workers where we really see them disproportionately affected is workers who worked in our meat and our chicken plants. Martha Hoover, like, people have no idea, not only the dangerous and gruesome work that goes into poultry, that goes into meat, that goes into pork production, but Martha, they also have no idea that our entire chain of meat and pork and chicken is controlled by 3, maybe 4 companies. That's it. That's it. And so what they have done is, because they have not only they have a lockdown on the system, not only what they have done in the name of efficiency is they've cut all types of costs in order to bring y'all a chicken sandwich for $3.99. And so when you look at a friend of ours, his name is Evan, and Evan owns Egg in Brooklyn that I absolutely love. And so when you look at Evan's chicken sandwich, which is a meal, where he might serve the chicken sandwich, it may be a pickle, something to drink, it may be a side, and his is $11. You're like, oh my goodness, why am I paying this price when I can go to Popeyes to get it for $3.99? Well, consumers need to be aware of whose bodies were oppressed, whose bodies were compromised in order to get you that $3.99 chicken. And what I mean by that is that Evan has made a choice where he's going to source his chicken from a farmer that raises chicken in a very human way. He's going to pay his front of the house workers a fair wage, a living wage, and they are not reliant upon tips from consumers. And so I want consumers to really think about how they spend their dollar, and is that dollar really reflected of their values? And listen, I get it. I understand that folks are like, I can't afford to spend, Devita, $11 for a chicken sandwich every day. Then don't. I'm not asking you to. But what I'm saying is that maybe instead of spending $3.99 for a chicken sandwich, maybe once a month you treat yourself and you go to a place like Egg, or you go to restaurants that are really trying to do it the right way, and you use your food dollars. You use the dollars that you have budgeted for going out for restaurants. And maybe instead of going out every week, maybe you only go out twice a month. But you know that with your limited dollars that you do have, you want to put those dollars to good uses. And here's the thing, Martha, if we do a better job communicating that, I think customers will respond. Do you know how many people are calling to asking where can they donate to people that are doing the work right now for bail relief funds all over this country? Consumers want to be involved. But we have to show them, we have to direct them to places that if they spend their dollar is going to be circulated not only in their community and their neighborhood, but it is going to be used in a way that is in direct relationship to their values. And what that means for many restaurateurs is that prices are probably going to have to increase. And what that means with consumers is that they have to be willing to pay the price, because it's not going to happen unless we link arm in arm with business owners, consumers, and yes, Martha, policy. Could you imagine what a game changer it would be in this country, and particularly in the restaurant industry, if restaurant workers had access to free, affordable health care?
So,
and you as a restaurateur didn't have to sit up all day and night, scratching your head, crying, wondering, how am I going to be able to afford to pay my staff's health care? Could you imagine if they get access to health care through the government?
Insane burden for small business people. And it's not that, yeah, it's a very complex conversation.
Yes.
As every conversation we have is, leave us with two things. Future of FoodLab, number one. Number two, you talk about making significant policy changes, and there's so many areas where we could go down a rabbit hole of policies that have to be changed. What are your top two thoughts on which policies need to be changed immediately so that our audience can start thinking about it and getting these changes made?
Yeah, so I think the first question, future of FoodLab, I want to encourage the folks who had the opportunity to view this podcast to please go to our website, which is www.foodlab.org. Really excited about that. We will be launching a new website in a few weeks, where we are going to be introducing our cohort, our fellows for 2020, 2021. This is going to be a group of cooks and chefs and restaurateurs who are going to be committed to fighting for policy that is going to support and deepen and strengthen the local food ecosystem. So we're in the process now of recruiting our 2021 fellows, which we're really super excited about. And our new website will not only introduce our fellows, but also have amazing resources on how folks can join in across the country on ensuring that our local food system is being supported and has the resources that it needs to strengthen the infrastructure, right? So we will be voices and thought leaders on the front lines of change. And Martha, I think if there are two important policy changes that I would like to have done immediately, I think that one is what this government has shown that it can already do. So we know, as a direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic, our legislators introduced something that was called the CARES Act. And within the CARES Act, there was something that was called enhanced unemployment. And what that enhanced unemployment allowed so many of restaurant workers to do was to take advantage of the fact that in addition to their unemployment, they received $600 more a week. You know what, Martha? That should be the floor. The government has already shown us what they are capable of doing. So you know what? Let's create policy around universal basic income. And let's have that being the standard, not the exception. You've already shown us that you can do it. So let's now move forward with universal basic income for folks in this country. So UBI is something that I would definitely like to be seen. And I think the second thing that I would like to be passed, and our senator who passed away in the city of Detroit, John Conyers, has brought this up in Congress every year that he was a member of Congress. And that is a study to be done on the loss of wealth in the African-American community as a means of really starting to create the framework of what reparations would look like for Black people in America. So I would at least like a commission or a study done. It's already right now in the House. John Conyers has lifted it up every single year that he was in Congress before he died. And I would love for that particular act to be passed so we can really understand what wealth was lost in this country as a result of the destruction and the violence that has been perpetuated against Black communities in the United States of America, and begin to have a real honest conversation around what reparations looks like.
Thank you, Devita, for this most enlightening conversation. We will gather resources and post them for people in our area who want to learn more, want to read more, and want to do more. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart, really just for being my friend and for inspiring me so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Matthew, and the entire Patachou team for setting this up. And I will, my goal is to be down in Indianapolis to see y'all real soon.
You know, you got a place to stay. And
yeah, of course.
We will be making a donation in your honor.
Thank you.
So thank you for all that you do.